I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for Wednesday, May 22nd. Can we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Chair Clark. Here. Vice Chair Perry.
Here.
Commissioner Baker.
Here.
Commissioner Lesnar Buxton. Commissioner Longstreet.
Here.
Commissioner Martinez Cohen.
Here.
Commissioner McGill.
Thank you. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, we don't.
Any written communications? These ones for Commissioner McGill, should I save until we're on that topic? Okay. That's it. I don't see anybody for public comment, so we'll move on from that. A youth council report, please. Welcome.
Chair Clark, we have two youth council members, Quinn Stefan and Stephanie Jimenez Cortez, that will present.
Hello, members of the Parks and Recreation Commission. I'm Quinn Stefan, the treasurer of the Youth Council.
And I'm Stephanie Jimenez Cortez.
We would like to share with you some of the projects that the Youth Council has been working on. For the month of April, we partnered with Draftsman Aleworks for our fundraising efforts for the Youth Council. We were on what's called the Karma Tap at the Mosaic Locale location on State Street, and we made $200 for the Youth Council.
We recently had the Teen Leadership Conference, partnering with POW, Police Activities League, and Future Leaders of America. We were lucky enough to have Mayor Murillo and Councilmember Sneddon in attendance, both who took the time to answer our questions thoughtfully and were able to hear presentations from each youth group, including their activities and goals.
Last Thursday, there was a joint city council and school board meeting, and it addressed gun safety. Our supervisor, Susan Young, spoke briefly on our behalf about what we are working on involving gun safety.
We are currently developing a gun safety public service announcement in partnership with the Coalition Against Gun Violence and TVSB, as well as City Council Member Oscar Gutierrez. The PSA focuses on the See Something, Say Something campaign to educate the community about the issue of gun violence with a teen focus.
We're thankful to Councilman Gutierrez for taking his time to teach the Youth Council members how to produce PSAs and for teaching us how to use the filming equipment and to support our creative process. He's been extremely helpful in this endeavor.
We also have a tobacco prevention program partnership with the County of Santa Barbara and are developing a second PSA addressing vaping and how vaping ads target the youth.
The Youth Council recently finished recruitment, which yielded 18 applications. We have conducted interviews and will make recommendations to the City Council for appointments that will be made on June 18th. Yes.
These new youth council members and the youth council year will begin July 1st.
Thank you. And Quinn, where can we look forward to seeing the PSAs when they're completed?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think they're just going to be showing on local news channels, yeah.
Great. And maybe do they go on the city website? That would be really something to see.
Okay.
I watched some of the youth council interviews. I'm really excited for you guys because you have a lot of good applicants.
Thank you.
Those kids were on fire. Does anyone have anything else to say? And congratulations on your fundraising efforts.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner committee assignment reports. I'll start with you, Mr. Baker.
The Golf Advisory Commission did not meet this month.
I did attend the arts and crafts show, and they were working through their wet days and makeup days and trying to come up with new definitions. So we're all progressing.
I was actually unable to attend the Creeks division meeting this past last week. Yeah, it was last week. However, they did receive two reports. One was about the bioassessment program in the Santa Barbara Creeks, and the other one was regarding stormwater management. And those are online if anyone would like to read them.
I attended the Neighborhood Advisory Council where they received a report on the West Side and Lower West Side neighborhood traffic planning process. That will be continuing on, and they they did receive a presentation on AUD and ADUs. I also attended the budget hearing and represented the commission.
Thank you. The Park Foundation meeting was not held this month. I did attend the Arroyo Borough Open Space ribbon cutting, and I'd like to give kudos to Mr. Benson of Creeks and the entire Creeks department for making that project happen. It's quite something to see. That's it. Do we have any ceremonial items?
Not this month.
There's a summary of council actions if anybody has questions on those. We've all got a chance to look at them. Oh. And minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion to
Make a motion to approve.
waive the reading and approve? Okay, I'll second that.
Make the motion to approve.
A second. And that brings us to the Street Tree Advisory Committee item. Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. Street Tree.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Clark and committee members, or commission members. Item 3A1 on your agenda is for a code designation of street tree species for the 1200 block of Portezuelo Avenue. The currently designated tree species is weeping bottlebrush, and in anticipation of a future street tree removal application, the applicant has requested a code designation of Chinese pistache. Currently, the 1100 and 1300 blocks of Portezuelo Avenue have both weeping bottlebrush and Chinese pistache listed, so there's code designation on both the 1100 and 1300 blocks, but the 1200 block of Portezuelo Avenue remains with just the weeping bottlebrush. The committee reviewed the applicant's suggestion, reviewed the species composition on street, felt that there was a lot of sense being made in continuing the code designation, and voted unanimously to support the code designation of the Chinese pistache for the 1200 block of Portezuelo Avenue.
Thank you. Any questions?
No. I would make a motion for the co-designation. It seems a little bit of a formality if the 11 and the 1300 block are already co-designated of the Chinese pistache.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, any
Aye.
discussion? No. Opposed? Sorry.
Item 3A2 on your agenda is also a species designation request for Jesmary Lane. Previously, during a commission meeting on March 27th of 2019, there was a property reviewed at 2122 Bath Street for the removal of 2 setback trees that were actually located on Jesmary Lane. The commission reviewed that application, approved the application with the condition that as many trees be planted along Jesmary Lane in the public right-of-way as feasible. The committee spent a little bit of time looking at species designation. The applicant had initially suggested something like a jacaranda in the unimproved portion of Jesmary Lane. The committee reviewed several species, including the jacaranda, and made a determination that the pink trumpet tree would be a more suitable fit. The improved parkway width is sizable, but not large enough to support the jacaranda. So after review, the committee made a recommendation to support the pink trumpet tree for the designated street tree species on Jesmary Lane with a unanimous vote.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to concur with the committee and designate the pink trumpet tree for Jesmary Lane.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved. Thank you. We've come to our director's report. Ms. Zachary.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, You have a more lengthy report this month. We've had a lot going on in Parks and Recreation. It's not even summer yet. It's almost summer, as you can imagine. A couple of things happening, beginning with the Expo de Eventos, which we had at the West Side Center. The idea there is to bring in vendors and potential renters, show off what we can provide if they want to have an event there, drum up some interest and excitement about the facility and how it can support private events, but also community events. And we had 40 people show up and some bookings as a result, and it was a nice success. Chair Clark mentioned the Arroyo Burrow open space ribbon cutting. That was really a wonderful event when you think of all the time that's been spent trying to figure out what to do with that property, and our ongoing efforts to really take advantage of the Arroyo Burrow watershed is really the last major open space in Santa Barbara. The work effort to do the creek restoration was substantial and very successful. So successful that the neighbors that basically bore the brunt of the trucks going up and down their street were actually pretty complimentary. And so I think, hats off to the Creeks Division staff for how they managed that project. And as the summer goes on and we go into the next wet season, it'll be really neat to see how the 7,000 plus plants grow in and really change the environment there. So that was really neat. I would also add that it was probably in your last month's agenda that the City Council approved the next phase, the contract for the design work for the next phase of restoration. So that's exciting that the project's continuing to move forward. We also did our budget presentation to Council, which is actually why we had we did not have the Golf Advisory Committee since it conflicted with that. Thank you to Commissioner Longstreet for attending, and we also had a letter that came forward from Commissioner McGill related to our budget, and a lot of focus from the Council related to park safety issues and options for providing greater support to the department to address issues. So we are preparing some additional information to take back to Council, specifically relating to costs associated with an additional park ranger, discussing further private security services, which is something we're proposing at the Cabrillo Pavilion when it reopens, the extent to which maybe community service workers could play a role, looking more carefully, and we've done some of it, but more advanced park improvements. And that really means not just the big picture master plan work that we've been doing, but looking at areas in our park system where we can define them as reservable only, whether it's for a youth camp or whether it's for a community event that would enable us to better manage that site. Security cameras also came up as whether that's a tool. And then lastly, we have in the past, and we continue to do, look for opportunities to bring more people into our parks, to be active in our parks, and that often dissuades the types of activities we don't want in our parks. So we'll be presenting that. We will share that information with the Commission. I know the Council has a couple more budget hearings, and then they have an evening hearing, which I believe is on June 5th, and to sort of do their final budget deliberations, and anticipate further discussion at the Council level on that day, but we'll keep you posted. We had a skate park community workshop for Ortega Park on Saturday, May 11th, and it was actually a really neat workshop to drop in on with the different skate advocates, designing what they would like it to look like, talking about the features that were important to them. This was done by staff and RRM, who's working on the project, and they brought in a skateboard designer to help facilitate that. And as with any community meeting that you have where there's lots of positive energy and excitement, it's always really good to see that people get energized about opportunities to improve our park system. So that was very successful. And then National Trails Day actually is coming up. So this is another one of our trail events, and it's going to be on Cold Spring Trail. Had a successful one in April. Yes, was it as long ago as that? Seems, yes, right, it's only May now. So looking forward to a collaborative effort that will continue with that trail event. That concludes my remarks about the director's report.
I have a question. When you're completed with the report and it's able to be released about these further safety measures, can you make sure that we get a copy of it? I think it's interesting. They'll look at private security and all of the different things that are happening, because it isn't just our department. It's the library, is looking at private security, and it's a very different tact, I think, for the city to take, and I would be interested in finding out more about how this is going to happen. Thank you.
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, yes, we will share what we're preparing for council with the commission.
Were you given a specific timeline for preparing those cost estimates? And
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the council request came out of our budget hearing, so it's part of looking at, well, if we were to do anything different in fiscal year 20 and 21, what would it be and what would it cost? And then also, what do we think the outcome would be? So it becomes part of their deliberations as they look across the city, and clearly they're taking into consideration all the departments and all the different needs across the city. If they, if there's some reason that they would want to change or add or alter what we're doing next year, that's why we're preparing the information for them.
okay, thank you. I just asked because it seems like a very large project in a short amount of time if you're expected to have it done by the end of budget hearings. Right.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, we actually are doing this all the time because we're always looking at ways in which to enhance park safety and trying to figure out how to stretch our department budget to address issues, some of which we've already developed because it's in our budget plan for next year. It's a matter of extending it. And essentially, it won't be an extensive multi-page report. It'll be more along the lines of a chart that identifies, a strategy or a method, a cost, and what we think it will achieve in terms of enhancing parks for the community.
Thank you.
Would there be any benefit? I know that you're looking at it for the Cabrillo Arts Center specifically. Library's looking at it to start July 1, I assume. It's part of this budget. So will we have the benefit of kind of observing what happens for them and what their experience is before Cabrillo Arts opens?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, certainly having an idea of how it enables the library to enhance its services and make the library a safe place for patrons. We will be able to know that. I think the structure that they might be seeking might be different than the structure we seek based on how the library is used versus how the Cabrillo Pavilion has people coming and going in different times of day. It's all similar. I think some of the things to look at when you think of that arrangement is any one of us goes to a shopping mall or a shopping center or a grocery store and you see security. You see security everywhere, actually, if you really think about it. What's that role and what are they doing there? Each facility probably has a different objective depending on what might be happening on that property.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the effectiveness with the target population.
Does anyone else have any questions for Ms. Zachary? Thank you for that. Did you want to add something? Oh, okay. So I guess now we're moving on to the proposed Title 15 amendments and sidewalk vending regulations.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, just as a bit of an introduction for this presentation, we would like to walk through some things that we've been working on actually for some time, particularly related to Title 15. They've been in a bit of a holding pattern while we've been restaffing the department. Michelle Kostanek, who's our new analyst, is going to do the presentation, and then Rich Hanna, Assistant Director, is also here. This is a work effort that has engaged staff in our Parks Division. Matt Parker, our new Parks Manager, is also here to answer questions, as well as staff in our Recreation Division. And we really are looking forward to your discussion about some of the issues we're seriously considering and want to move forward with. And then we can continue working on them. Thank you.
Clark, Commissioners, thank you. As Jill said, we're going to be presenting today proposed amendments to Title 15 of the Municipal Code, and this is pertaining to obviously Parks and Recreation. Also present proposed regulations related to the Senate Bill 946, which is in relation to sidewalk vending. And then, as Jill stated, we want to have discussion and receive feedback from the Commission regarding those recommendations. The key issues addressed with these proposed changes are to improve park management and maintenance, enhance park safety, discourage misuse and illegal activity, and support productive community park uses for residents and visitors. One of the main issues that came up are park hours, and this is in attachment 1, the back 2 pages regarding closing time. Currently, it lists that all our parks close at 10 and open at sunrise, with the exception of parks that are listed. So currently, we have 2 basic timeframes, with the exception of such as Skater's Point. It actually opens up at 8, but basically there's 2 categories, and the sunrise to 1.5 hour after sunset basically comprises sports facilities, the community gardens, and then 12 parks that are kind of varied. They're open space, they're community parks, passive parks. So they're varied, and that's actually based on a couple of factors, such as Franceschi Park, that has a caretaker and a gate, so that makes sense to close it at sunset. And then also at discretion of the director, if there's misuse or other issues, parks can be closed based on that. So Ortega Park, I think, was the most recent one that was put on this particular list. Then the remainder of the parks are actually closed at 10. So so the recommendation is to make the times consistent from sunrise to sunset, except by permit. This really aligns with a lot of local agencies, such as the county, city of Goleta, city of Carpinteria, and many other cities in our area. And it really creates consistency for the public, for the park rangers, for the police department to have that time consistent. We can also put it on our new signage, and it's very clear to the public. It also does reduce misuse activities in problem areas. Most of those graffiti and those kind of things happen in the evening hours. And again, it enhances safety through enforcement. Jill, I don't know if I want to keep on going or get feedback from each.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, we'll keep going, and I think the mention just for you too is having consistency is something we've determined is critical. And the sunrise to sunset concept means in the summertime the sun sets later, and obviously people want to be outside. So really thinking of it, parks are essentially open when it's light out is the simplest way to communicate to the public. You know a public park is open if it's light out, whether it's in the winter or the summertime, and we get more hours in the summer. And we figured that was a very clear way to communicate park hours versus this variability.
Thank you. A new area that we were proposing to add to Title 15 is regard to adult access to playgrounds and aquatic facilities. We have 22 playgrounds, 3 aquatic facilities in our park system. This would be proposed to limit adult access if a person is not accompanied by a minor child in these particular zones. It creates that safety environment, safety play zone for children. It also hopefully would reduce activities such as adults sleeping in these areas, illegal drug and alcohol activity, and loitering that can occur around these spaces. And again, also provide law enforcement with a tool to address these activities. The recommendation, well, other cities throughout the country have adopted similar ordinances, and so we kind of want to propose following those examples. And one of them is, or there's 3 different areas, is to set a distance from the defined play areas. So 10 to 25 feet seemed reasonable because it didn't interfere with people having a picnic or reading a book or just, enjoying the park space as they freely should be able to do. And also to define minor age. Example is 12 years and under. Most of our playgrounds are designed for under 12 years old. And also define adult age. 18 years and older obviously is our legal adult age. So those are our recommendations or examples of what we would propose.
There was, when we were discussing the Gwendolyn Strong playground, there was a workaround for people with special needs. Would that be able to be incorporated into this?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, certainly it could be. And these recommendations are really suggestions that we would love your feedback on. Nothing is staff is definitively recommending A or B. There are different situations in our park system where we're like, well, how would that apply here? So we have to think about those carefully. And under the municipal code, there is a caveat that we can always establish except by permit. And so, for the example, advancing a playground such as the one that we would like to develop at Dwight Murphy, that we would want to be open for all abilities and older people or adults perhaps with that would benefit from being on the playground. I think we also talked in that case that they would always be accompanied by somebody. It's not that someone would be alone there. So we can find ways to address that.
Yeah, it would be really important, and not just for the Gwendolyn Strong playground, but for all of our playgrounds. I mean, having worked at Devereux, where you're taking adults out in many cases for recreation that might really want to use the playground, or it seems like that's a tough one. The other question I had was, what happens to that 13 to 18-year-old age range? They seem...
I think they can still be on the playground. They're not a minor, but they're not an adult.
Yes. They seem to be not defined, and so we maybe want to...
So, Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, that's a great question. We can look at it further. I would add that sometimes one of the challenges we have is that people that are larger than a 12-year-old are using our playgrounds and impacting the playground itself and creating issues where we have to go in and make repairs. So we'll take a closer look at that. It's great feedback for us to consider. If a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old is in a playground alone, what does that really mean? I think if you go back to the prior slide, our goal here is in some of our parks, we do have adults that are there for extended periods of time, undertaking activities that are not intended for a playground and therefore make it a place that families and children do not want to go. And that's what we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, recently the city has approved a 3-year pilot program for shared bicycles and mobility devices. These are dockless bike and power source devices that people can rent via their phone app. Ordinance was also adopted May 7th to establish regulations for services and devices. The main issues kind of around this are really abandoned bikes are being left in pathways and obstructing people's path of travel. It also creates clutter and is very aesthetically unpleasing. So within the ordinance that was recently passed, there is it does address it's unlawful to obstruct pedestrian pathways, and it does specify in parks. So as a recommendation, we are considering expanding that and really specifying where we don't currently allow bikes to be in parks. And in particular, there's the Shoreline Pathway, Rattlesnake Park, those aren't addressed in our ordinance. So by doing this, we provide, again, clarity and consistency for the public, reduce confusion, and limit the impact of having abandoned bikes strewn throughout the park system.
Quick question. Where can those bikes actually park? I read through the list of all the places they can't park, and I couldn't imagine a place where they could.
So Chair Clark and Commissioners, the ordinance that was adopted by City Council is for a 3-year pilot. And the ordinance includes the provision that and I believe his title is Transportation and Parking Manager, will develop rules and regulations regarding the permitting of these devices and where they can be docked and stored and all that sort of thing. The challenge that we have in this city is that when you think of going to other cities and there's these docking stations, we have very little public right-of-way where that can occur. And so the concept of a standalone shared mobility device seems like it might work here. There are areas where it will be permitted and areas where it won't be permitted, as was indicated in the prior slide. That's still under development, but staff has the authority by ordinance to develop the program and see if an operator comes forward and wants to give it a go.
Okay, another issue that happened, we don't address this currently in our Title 15, but of course we have barbecues and people bringing in barbecues to our parks. Currently, 12 parks have individual barbecues that we provide. Replacement has been reduced within the last 8 years per the Parks Division, and that's due to misuse and just fire concerns over this last few years. Again, we don't address this currently in our Title 15 at this point. We're proposing to add it into Title 15, but have it in defined picnic areas except by permit, and have the units be standalone, enclosed, and self-contained, obviously for safety concerns, and establish specific prohibited areas, such as in open space, as that's a high fire hazard area. So we can define specific areas based on those kind of concerns. Okay. This is another section of the municipal code, and it's not in Title 15, but it obviously refers to our parks. It's alcohol in parks. We can, by resolution, define where we want to allow alcohol in our parks. So resolution, that's attachment number 3, was adopted in March 2011. And it defines 13 parks, including open space parks, that allow alcohol, so possession of alcohol, and such as Mission Historical Park, Schofield Park, and again, all our open space parks. And then there's 16 parks that are only allowed by permit, and those are specifically reservable spaces like group reservations, such as Dwight Murphy, Mackenzie Park, and Oak Park. And then our remaining locations, we prohibit alcohol in those areas. So for discussion, it was, we'd like to either prohibit to maybe specific areas that we have misuse and illegal activity, or to perhaps make it prohibited in all our parks and only have it by permit only. So that was kind of an area that we needed to get some feedback on to go further.
At this moment in time? Or at the end of the, okay. I understand where this proposed amendment is coming from, and I'm conflicted. Part of me really believes there shouldn't be alcohol allowed in our parks without a permit system to keep our parks kid and family friendly. I wholeheartedly believe that, but I've tossed it around to some friends and asked what they thought, and they feel almost as it's a slight in that it's eradicating the ability for spontaneous social gatherings. You can't say, hey, let's go here after work and have a beer and a barbecue. So as much as I understand the need for it, I can also understand the concern and kind of backlash that might happen in our department if this gets changed.
And as I had the last time we did this, it we have many families that this is the place they go for their birthday, christening. They're not having drunken brawls. They're having a beer or a glass of wine with their family gathering. And they're fine not being in a permitted picnic area. They maybe don't have the extra $250 to reserve a place. We see them in Alameda Park and all kinds of different places spontaneously. And I worry about taking that away from families and individuals that are doing it simply to control those who are gonna abuse it anyhow. So that's where I walk the line. How is what we're doing working? And I would see that in a park within distance, I think we have with playgrounds and things like that, we should not have alcohol. We don't want broken beer bottles in our parks. We don't want that kind of nuisance issues. But I really want the families that can least afford and would be most impacted to have some alternatives for their family gatherings.
I'd like some more clarification. What is being proposed? It's not clear. Do you have something proposed, or?
So Chair Clark and Commissioners, we included this in the presentation because alcohol can have negative impacts in our park system, the use of alcohol. I don't want to say abuse, but abuse of alcohol for a variety of reasons. And at the staff level, it's come up a few times. I can also say that from our perspective as staff, we are conflicted for the very reasons that has already been raised, because there are wonderful opportunities for families and friends to gather in our parks. That's what they're there for. And a reluctance to really start prohibiting more activities, because then it becomes a place that people feel like they can't go. So we really are here for feedback. There's no recommendation yet, except when we look at the parks that we have where we have misuse and illegal activity, there's a few that we could add to the list that would be alcohol by permit only. One example, and it's not consistent. I mean, it's not, maybe not to the extent that we've had at Oak Park, for example, and Ortega Park. We've gone in and made recommendations to council that we change the rules there because it has been a significant impact to other park users. We want to have the discussion with you because it comes up internally for us, and as the commission, having your feedback is super helpful. I think, Rich, if you have, I can probably pull up on my email, the parks that we have that sort of fall into those areas where we still have some management misuse issues. Is alcohol one way to prohibiting alcohol one way to help minimize those? It becomes an enforcement tool, essentially. You think about it, it's like, how do we minimize an activity that we don't want there? Well, if they happen to be doing something that's not allowed, well, then you can enforce that, and that helps manage the park.
I would immediately consider open space, because open space is not where you go for a barbecue. We have enough people getting themselves in trouble on our front country trails and, having to be rescued. We read it every week. But see, that to me wouldn't impact the families having a party. Some of the other ones I look at are real neighborhood parks that I think the neighbors around them keep an eye on and maybe have different feelings. I'd love to hear from them, but those are ones I think we'd want to keep on this list allowed. But I would immediately be able to go with open space without a whole problem. Those are the places where you're supposed to be doing something healthy and natural, not having a party or camping.
Which parks are just designated open spaces?
Chair Clark and commissioners, I'll do my best to rattle them off because it's actually a designation that's established in the code. So we designate. So Royal Borough Open Space, Douglas Family Preserve, Hale Park. That gives you a sense. They're on your exhibit, perhaps.
Oh, got it.
I think if we look at our matrix you gave us, it gives us all of the designations of the parks.
Correct.
So, you know, as I look at them, are there ones on there that are outstanding to you that have issues with, that we need to address?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, we actually did a quick review, and Douglas Family Preserve is the one open space park where alcohol is allowed. I don't believe, and that as it relates to where we have potential issues of misuse. So when you think, if you want to draw the nexus between the type of activity we'd like to discourage and an open space park, that is one of the open space parks where that occurs. It doesn't mean it's not going to occur at some point in the future in another open space park. It just happens to be today's conditions.
Question, since we're discussing alcohol, are there any restrictions on cannabis in the park?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Perry, it's prohibited to smoke in all city parks with the exception of the golf course, on the course. All products, including vaping.
Right, that was the no
that.
smoking ban that was passed last year, or 2016 or something like that, yeah.
Second part of my question is McKinsey Park. As a consumer there, it was a wonderful venue during Fiesta when you could sit with your family and have dinner and a beer. And in the advent of the beer garden, the people are still there and they still come out after hours, but you have a really hard separation between families of children and parents because they are now caged consumers. Will that ever be looked at again? It sort of was born out of a convention in San Diego probably 15, 20 years ago. It was not a result of a problem in the park.
So Chair Clark and Commissioner Perry, Rich Hanna, Assistant Parks and Recreation Director, that's actually a regulation that's imposed on us by the Alcohol Beverage Control. So it's actually a state regulation. And really it's done to really, at least my interpretation of it is, you can have beer gardens that are not necessarily fenced, but you have to be in a certain environment where it's harmonious with the other activities that are going on. So sometimes you'll go to a sporting event and people can cruise around with alcohol and so forth. In other areas, you've got to be kind of enclosed in some sort of a staged area. It can depend on the number of people, the location, the other activities that are going on. That would be something we'd be taking direction from our local police department and the state that oversees the ABC permitting as it relates to alcohol and distribution in public areas.
So Avocado Festival would be a good comparison. Their alcohol area is from Carpinteria Avenue to the train tracks and a block either side of Linden, I believe. But there's no segregation within the venue itself. How is that exempted?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Perry, I'd need to look into that. I don't know how the city of Carpinteria permits their Avocado Festival, but I'd be happy to look into that and report that back to the commission.
Thank you.
So just for the commission, we don't have to come to some resolution this evening at your meeting. Really, it's feedback. And I think what we're hearing is you have some of the sort of concerns we have. Well, hey, what about the majority of people that go to parks and just might want to include some form of alcohol? I would add having glass is something we absolutely discourage and prohibit because of the potential safety issue of broken glass, whether it's wine or beer or another bottle of certain type of alcohol.
Concur with Chair Longstreet on the open space designation with alcohol. I'm not sure that alcohol is really needed at those open spaces, but I would be hesitant with the Douglas Family Preserve I would want to know whether the families that live in those neighborhoods, whether they're in the habit of going there at sunset with their families and having a beer while they walk their dogs. It wouldn't want to change their way of life,
Yeah.
since they do allow us to use that open space as a community.
Yes, I think this is a bigger community discussion because, as Chair Clark said, the Douglas Family Preserve, we do hear the other side of that too about underage drinking. It's an easy place to get to kind of go under the radar a bit. But I would just be curious about what parks we have our issues in and if we need to adjust our list without kind of going draconian and doing everything.
I would concur with what Commissioner Longstreet just said. I frequent a lot of parks and recreation areas, and I didn't even realize that alcohol was allowed in some of them, but I probably, bring it anyways when I'm walking my dog and things like that. Definitely Douglas Family Preserve. But I think what our goal should be is to align the areas where we have problems with the places that we could potentially enforce something that is that would help mitigate that, and that is enforceable to where those issues are. I think that seems to make the most sense without banning it completely. I understand consistency, but I also think it's a fine line, like we all just talked about, between recreating and misuse.
Before we move on to sidewalk vending, are we going to come back to the earlier issues? I don't think many of us said stuff about the park opening and closing times, or...
It's completely at your discretion. If you'd like to, we certainly can.
Okay, maybe we can, when we're done, we can revisit the beginning. So if any of us want to say something about the hours and the adults and playgrounds, we have the chance. Thanks.
Great. So the next topic is sidewalk vending. Senate Bill 946 was effective at the beginning of this year, and purpose of it was to legalize and decriminalize sidewalk vending and promote entrepreneurship. It does permit vending on city sidewalks and parks, and prior to that, the city did not allow that this activity. They can sell food or merchandise by virtually any form of a push cart stand on persons, a variety of forms of how they can sell, and they can be roaming or stationary. We do have, if we pass an ordinance, to regulate time, place, and manner. And based on if it's a health or safety or welfare concern, interferes with the nature of the park, natural resources, or recreation opportunities, or a farmer's market or swap meet. Also a permanent event such as a sporting event, a rental, a special event. And also it cannot be, or it can be restricted where we have exclusive concessionaires, and also has to be compliant with ADA standards. So since January, we developed a very comprehensive matrix, kind of outlining every single park, the hours, what category it falls under, if it's a community park, a passive park, open space park, its acreage, and then all the features and amenities that are at that particular park. So that way we'd have a full view of kind of a full picture of our park system. And then from there, we met over these last few months and just determined where it would make more sense to restrict based on all these features. And then, of course, we have to offer vending opportunities in certain areas. There's more space, less features, so obviously there's more appropriate space for people to vend. And then there's other areas that are less appropriate. And we also base that on referring to parts of the legislation. So the recommendations we came about through going through this process of evaluation and also meeting with the city attorney's office is to prohibit in areas where it's very, they're sensitive environments. These are 3 passive parks that are listed that have a lot of resources such as ponds and wildlife and particular things that we wouldn't really want a lot of traffic in those areas. And also where we have concessionaires, which is the golf course and Cabrillo Pavilion, And we're also looking at East, West, and Ledbetter beaches as well. And we also are suggesting to prohibit in parking lots and in park benches. We can also limit where the distance from specific areas. This is to make sure people can enjoy their activities, and if they're renting a space, they're not inundated with these vendors. So there's restriction of 50 feet from picnic areas, rentable spaces, sporting events, also waterways, creeks and ponds. And then 100 feet from playgrounds, 300 feet from shoreline, and then 3 feet or less from any pathway, and that's an ADA safety concern. So the next steps are for sidewalk vending. We can either have a separate ordinance and under Title 15, or we can combine it with the citywide effort. We also need to meet with the city attorney's office to draft the ordinance changes, the language, and then after that, the draft goes to the ordinance committee, and then finally for city council approval and adoption. So this is the end of the presentation. We'd like to get your feedback on the issues that we presented.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, if I could just add a little bit more information regarding the Senate bill. It applies citywide, and so and essentially it allows sidewalk vending by permit. So it involves the city establishing a permitting process, just like everything else, and also allows local health authorities to require that there's a health permit if it's serving of food. So none of that is different, although a sidewalk vending permit would be different from any other permit that the city has issued before. So internally, interdepartmentally, we're sort of looking at, well, what is that permit? What are we asking for? What does it cost? And then where can we direct sidewalk vendors where under this law they can vend, whether they vend food or flip-flops or whatever it might be. And our concerns as the Parks and Recreation is we manage a lot of open space and acreage throughout the city. And absent any clear direction regarding where in any one park a vendor can set up, the concern is it will be difficult, A, to manage. We don't really know how it'll all play out. B, we don't want it to interfere with public use of that park space. But we also want to make sure we're consistent with the law and establish places where vendors could exist. Some of the considerations that we had at the staff level include imagining someone has reserved Chase Palm Park for a festival, which includes vendors, and people pay an entry fee. And absent any other rule, what would prevent 10 vendors that didn't pay the entry fee setting up shop in the vicinity of that event? That being a situation where on X day where there's a permanent event in Y park, vendors would not be permitted within in a certain distance. If there isn't an event there, it might be a different situation. And so there might be more opportunity for a sidewalk vendor to pass through a park area. Similarly, where we have concessions, so we have businesses that have arranged to provide a service for a fee to the public for which we get some revenue, to what extent, and the law allows us to establish rules that prevent and clarify where a vendor would be allowed to be within the vicinity of an existing concessionaire. So what we're grappling with is what really makes sense and what do we anticipate could happen. We already know that when we do have random vendors, it's usually associated with a community event or a sporting event. And we know people appreciate that often. But how do we do it in a way that supports that initiative from the state level, also enhances our park, but doesn't create a management or a maintenance issue? One of the issues we have, for example, at Ortega Park is those are vendors that should have various permits to operate is the trash that's left behind. So how much cleanup are we doing when those events occur that we could better manage through a set of rules?
Yeah, but I have street vending issues, and I have for many years. And trash was top of my list, but also things like the proximity to schools and the Boys and Girls Club and places where we have free lunch programs going on, where we're trying to serve kids nutritious meals, and we've got, someone competing. We need to somehow protect that. Also, proximity to businesses. The current climate in our community is we can't fill storefronts. And how can we put one more impediment of someone who doesn't have to have rent, but can sell ice cream bars when the little store up the street is doing it another way and is there always for the community. So those are concerns I have. This is a petty one, but noise. I don't want to hear the horn the whole time you're selling corn across the street from my house. I think there has to be some regulation to the noise part of it when people are going up and down the street. And then the most important one to me is, you're going to get a health permit, but how do we manage the ongoing sanitation? I have watched vendors walk out from the railroad right away, zipping up their fly and selling corn. And that's disgusting. And that happens. And we're dealing with a measles outbreak now, but what happens when we get some sort of hepatitis thing going or whatever? So those have been my concerns for years, and this really upsets me that I'm glad we're trying to get a handle on it, but we have vendors that pay us every year to be in the art show. How do we protect them? So it is a big issue, and we need to be serious about it. Again, I would add open space to this, where it says out of the park, or limitations in parks. Nobody should be in the open space, but selling things. Those are our natural protected spaces. So I also am concerned about the restaurants, not just our concessionaires, but any of the ones that happen.
I share Commissioner Longstreet's concerns for our Santa Barbara business owners and restaurant owners. If we can't fill our storefronts on State Street, how can we accept people hawking additional goods? Although I do support entrepreneurship at the same time. Another concern I have is that we go to our parks and open spaces to recreate for free, for the most part. We don't go to have goods hawked at us or feel pressure to buy things. And I've been other places around the world where you go to parks and open spaces and you're pressured by people who are looking to you, and sometimes you feel like, maybe we need to spend some money, help these people out. I think we deserve to have a place to escape from the materialism of our culture. And our parks and open spaces are those. Commissioner McGill did send a letter which she addressed all of the potential ordinance issues, and she says with respect to sidewalk vending, she's overall relaxed about the idea, and suspects that some residents would consider them beneficial, but she's concerned about vendors overwhelming our parks, increased litter and pollution. She has concerns about creeks and waterways being covered under the term sensitive habitat, and that we should spell out the distance vendors must stay away from them, which I believe is already spelled out. She suggests limiting the number of vendors through a first-come, first-serve reservation system, not a permit system, but a reservation system, not with a fee, but looking for a way to manage numbers. And she's wondering if the ordinance can include a condition that vendors in parks are responsible for picking up litter within a given radius of their stand.
I like those suggestions.
that Commissioner McGill had. I also would offer just an opposite perspective. The large majority of street vendors are women and minorities that are trying to be entrepreneurial and make a living. And I think it's a cultural thing. A lot of people of a certain culture would really appreciate it, or it's a way of life. It's something that's comforting to them or convenient. Whereas a lot of other people might see it as a nuisance. So I, in general, am supportive of street vending. I think it's a good state statute. I like it. I do come from a small business background, so I definitely see it as a way for somebody to get started. You start with the cart, then you maybe get a truck, then you move on to the brick and mortar. And not everyone can afford to pay $10,000 rent on State Street. So I see it as a continuum of entrepreneurship and small business building. And again, people of a Latino culture look at it a lot differently and really appreciate it and like it. So I just would like to be a little bit more open to that. I do agree with the concerns about litter and sanitation. I would like to see there be regulation, but not so restrictive that people don't do it or just neglect it 100%. I think there's a happy medium between trying to be welcoming to people and enforcing some standards, but not making it so restrictive that people just ignore it and keep flying under the radar or get very upset about it the other way. Those would be my comments.
I mean, vending could be a good thing for our community. I think it just depends on how it's regulated. I do think a permitting process is necessary. I think a fee is necessary. Every business owner in our town pays taxes and fees to sell their goods. Why shouldn't anyone else do that? Even if it's not an insane amount, I think some regulatory fee would be necessary to regulate who's vending, who's willing to vend, and what they're going to vend. I think maybe part of the process could be a limit on time, maybe certain hours. Ms. McGill said that, certain numbers of vendors. I don't think it should be a first come first serve basis, but if you have a permit process that allows you to say, I'm willing to vend here at this location A, location B, location C, give options to them rather than saying you can't do it here, because then you're going to have 10 vendors all go to one park and then they're competing, and then that creates more issues within the vendors. I think if there's a permit process, you can track what other events are going on during that time that they want to vend, because they're going to want to vend during, busy hours. They're not going to vend just on a random Sunday afternoon if there's nothing going on. They're here to make money. So I think it's taken into consideration the number of vendors. I think what other city events or public events are going on, private events where families or other people from the community rented out a space for permits at parks. So things like that. It doesn't need to be a difficult permit process, but I think something to promote safety, health, and use of the parks as they're intended, while also allowing for community members to vend in the right areas.
I had just a couple other questions.
Chair Clark, if I could just answer some of the comments
yes.
that you have, because it might help, and then maybe it'll lead into your questions. The permitting is done like a business license, is a way to think about it. So that's something that the finance department will manage. The rules will help guide where they can actually do it once they have a permit. And I would direct a commission to this matrix, because for every park it indicates areas where we think, okay, in these areas we can sort of show, and our plan is to map each park, which basically says these areas are okay for sidewalk vending. And that way we have a clearly defined area. Similarly, and vending's not allowed when there's a special event going on. And that would just be part of what a vendor would hopefully know and understand, versus we would not be permitting a vendor specifically in a park. It would be these are the places a vendor can go anywhere in the city to vend. and that it would be clear what those rules are, and then trying to find places within our park system so that we can meet the need of our park users, being well aware that it is a service or an opportunity that people appreciate. How do we do it in a way that's healthful? Because we could probably improve in that way. And how do we do it in a way that supports park use without creating adverse problems? The first come, first serve is we won't be in a position to be managing what vendor is in a park. So the idea is if we have designated areas, we can manage those. And if we, and as part of looking at the regulatory process, require that it's self-contained. So they have to come in self-contained and have to leave self-contained. So hopefully, and hopefully their patrons realize that placing items in a litter receptacle is a good idea. Those types of things. So hopefully that helps clarify some of the comments that you have is well taken. We're going to be trying to address them in a variety of ways.
As you talk about that, it makes me think maybe there's a way to build in a system where if you get, let's say, 3 strikes, litter. I'm thinking litter in the parks. If it's documented that you've had some violations, it's a mess when you leave that area, then your permit's revoked for a period of time. That kind of thing, so that people have an incentive to keep the area clean. The other thing, I'm pretty sure this is impossible, but in the old days, when we had all the corn vendors, so many corn vendors, they were brought up from Oxnard and dropped off. They weren't local. I would assume the people wouldn't have had access to knowing rules. So is there a way to make, that'd be a concern I'd have, is addressing local people benefiting from this, not people being trucked in. But it would be a concern I had. Because I know we've tried things like opening the West Side Kitchen and making commercial kitchens to help small businesses get started. So, if that's what we're talking about, I'd really want it to be our local people starting small businesses.
Well said.
Sort of a follow-up to that question is, after this is enacted, or has there any outreach been done with the small business community to get their feedback on enforceability, practicality, also translating this into Spanish, disseminating the information? It's not assumed, honestly, that anyone who's not on this commission or actually watching would know anything about this.
Chair Clark and Commissioner Martinez-Cohen, this is just the beginning. We don't have an ordinance that specifies how we'll respond to SB 943. Anybody in Santa Barbara can pretty much vend anywhere today, until we come up with a way to better define where it's allowed. So there's a lot more to be done. Mm-hmm. We're bringing it to you because we consider it a critical issue for our park system, but also anticipate that most of it will occur where there's large groups of people, because that's where you're more likely to have economic success. Mm-hmm. So I think it'll trend around Alameda Park, Chase Palm Park, the Beachfront, Skate Park, Ortega Park, Dwight Murphy, where it's already occurring, and where we want to establish methods by which we can support the use of those parks, and also people that come and pay to use our parks, that they don't feel that their use is being inhibited by someone else coming in and being able to vend in a park without paying any permit fees, if that gives you an idea. So we're very much at the beginning. Clearly a lot of outreach will have to happen once the system's set up, and it most certainly will have to be in 2 languages.
Okay. Thanks.
I appreciate Commissioner Martinez-Cohen's comments on the sidewalk vending being a cultural thing, and I wouldn't want to limit a large part of our community that finds that to be like a safe and culturally beneficial aspect of our community. And looking at this matrix, I went through it today, and a lot of my fears of recreational activities being encroached on were alleviated by looking at the restrictions that you're proposing, because it can't be during other special events. It can't be close to playgrounds. It can't be on benches. I feel like you're really close to getting a working solution for this. One question I did have, though, is some of these say on grassy areas, and I'm wondering if the same vendors go day in, day out to the same grassy area, if that landscaping will require increased maintenance to survive.
Chair Clark, it's really not possible to answer that question right now. But certainly, whenever you have a high use in a certain area, you do have a potential impact. But I don't think we could foresee that at this point.
Comments?
I just want to say what a great job the Matrix is. I mean, it's really well put together. It really clearly defines, it's where you guys are going with it. Where it's going to be permissible. I just think as a potential consumer of one of these vendors, it's if I'm at one of these parks and there's something that I might need, you don't know. But it'd be nice to to get a water or get a snack or something that I think that we might take for granted if we're at these parks. I'm out and about sometimes and I'm like parched. It'd be nice to have the ability to buy that. And I think this way it seems that if I'm at this place, I can go to that vendor. They don't need to encroach on my use while I'm at those parks. So I think how you've defined things is definitely a great leadway into making this compatible with our current use. So thank you.
Did anyone at this time want to go back and review or make comments about the proposed changes to the park closing hours or playground and adults being on the playgrounds?
I have a question. We've just put in exercise equipment in several locations. In the winter, is there enough light in those areas for people to continue to use them after dark? Yes. I think they're great, and there's quite a few people that work that 5 o'clock, 5:30, they might go out for a run and want to stop and work out a little bit. Let's say at Dwight Murphy. How would that work, or would it be able to have that wrapped into this is an active area? Permits at the ball field keep it open?
So Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, so in the areas where we have outdoor exercise equipment, there's enough cast-off light from the street lighting there for people to be using the equipment. Whether that's safe or not, I couldn't answer that question. And in some areas, like recently at Cabrillo Ballpark, we also put pathway lighting in those areas as well, just to define the pathway for safe travel. So you could actually use the exercise equipment. You'd be using it in a way that's compatible for the park, so it's not a misuse type behavior. And then where we have other exercise equipment, if there's sport activities that are going on with the lights, so Major League Softball, for example, when their lights are on, you could use any part of Cabrillo Ballpark up until 10 p.m. Because the lights are on for that period of time.
Yeah, with regards to the timing, I think it does make sense to make it easier for you to regulate as far as making all the times uniform. I guess my question was sort of related to Commissioner Longstreet, that if people were to be using the park after those hours, but in a way that was not misuse, that would not be like you're not going to arrest somebody or give them a ticket or something. This would be to enforce the misuse, not the correct use, regardless of what the hours of the park are. Is that correct?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, parks should be used during daylight hours except by permit. Parks are occasionally used outside daylight hours by people who are passing through them early in the morning or late in the evening as part of a walk or a run or something like that. What we don't need to encourage is groups of people hanging out in parks after hours for a variety of reasons. One, the impact to the park, whether it's a misuse or not. Two, it encourages others to do that, which then could lead to behaviors we don't want. Of course, we anticipate at any one time there could be someone who is passing through a park when it's dark, and there isn't going to be someone waiting at one end to enforce it. But what it does is it really helps the department as well as the police department to address issues that often occur after dark. And those are the responses we have to make, and that's what we're trying to get to. I think you will find if we all spent some time going by parks, when it's dark, there generally aren't that many people there unless the lights are on and they're playing a game or they're part of an event. It's really to give us a way to manage activities that happen under the cover of darkness. Minimize them, I should say.
Sunset is defined as the time that the sun actually sets, not when it gets dark, correct? Because then people have time to get back to their cars and get out of there after the sun has set. Yeah, okay.
Commissioner McGill brought up the beachfront. Chase Palm Park, and the sidewalks, of course, wouldn't be included. But what about like the multi-use, the beachway? Is that an issue that we're getting? Because there are people down there at all times.
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, that is one area where we really do need to enforce park hours based on the activities that we have that occur down there that adversely affect the opportunity for the general public to use those areas during the daytime. If someone is riding a bicycle along the beachway going from Stearns Wharf to Milpas, that's not what we're talking about.
Right. And a tourist that's walking from Stearns Wharf to Fess Parkers on the beachway at night taking their life in their hands is fine. I mean, that's what... Is there a way to write it so that it says passing through our... when we have areas, Alameda Park, not... I mean, that's a shortcut for some people going home from State Street. It's not a great one unless you're in a group, but those are areas where if we could write it so that it says while passing through or whatever.
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, the goal here is to provide a way to enforce activities we don't want. It is highly unlikely that law enforcement would be called if someone was walking through a park.
We might want them there more often, but we're not going to get it.
Depends on what you look like also.
Okay. Not to be remiss, Commissioner McGill did also say that she would appreciate the actual beaches itself, not just the parkways being open until 10, because some people enjoy walking on the beach after dark. So she was wondering if that could be an exception.
I would say that's an issue because that's a danger, and we don't have safety out there. As she pointed out, it's close to the bars, and that is a red flag for me, not a, let's go walk on the beach. Yeah, I would say our beaches need to be closed. I'm more concerned about pathways and stuff, but our beaches are not enforceable. And as someone who walks early in the morning on the beach, and down in the harbor, I see a lot of campers.
Does anybody have anything else to say? I feel like there's so many issues here, and you guys have done such an amazing and thorough job that you've answered a lot of our questions, and these are not going to be issues that are easy to come to terms with or solve. But I'm again, continually impressed by what the department's doing proactively to keep our parks safe. I think it's incredible. I worry about enforcement with all this, but I don't.
So Chair Clark and Commissioners, that's a good question. I just want to speak a little bit to the enforcement side, at least from the park ranger's perspective. There's the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And so a lot of our park rangers engage with people in the parks that may be involved in an activity that's not compliant with the rules. They're asked to comply. They comply, and then they move on, and everybody has a great day. The park hours for the signage, or if we go down this road with where alcohol is allowed and not allowed, it's a tool that for people that do not follow a lawful command or are there really engaged in misuse behavior, it becomes a tool that could then lead from the spirit of the law to the letter of the law, which could involve enforcement, arrest, citation. So it's not our intent to be out there enforcing all of these rules all the time. We just don't have those resources in place. And I think most people, you know, when they're told to comply with a park rule or a behavior, they do so and then continue on with their activity. And so from an enforcement perspective, it's just a tool for the people that are engaged in the worst type of behavior. Or in a situation like Oak Park, a group gathers there, they get loud, it's after the park's closed, the neighbors want to have a resource, the police get called there to kind of deal with a noise complaint. They need to have something they can point to say the park's closed, you guys need to move along, or this group needs to move along. So the signage and the rules and the hours really is just a tool that we can use to kind of help make our parks safer and more accessible to the community as a whole.
So Chair Clark and Commissioners, your input's super valuable. Thank you. We are really at the stages of further working on these recommendations. They ultimately would go into a recommendation to the Ordinance Committee to amend Title 15. We work closely with the City Attorney's Office. They obviously advise us regarding language and content and what can and can't be done. And that is where we'll continue working. So that when we get closer to taking something to Ordinance Committee, we'll certainly report back to the Commission our progress.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, I believe, do we have any old business? I believe that we can adjourn this meeting. So adjourned.